Welcome to Movies That Matter, a podcast going beyond basic film criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole, and with me today is...
Adam.
And what movie are we overanalyzing this week?
This week we are overanalyzing Napoleon, an epic that details the checkered rise and fall of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte and his relentless journey to power through the prism of his addictive, volatile relationship with his wife, Josephine. Nicole, what did you think?
I think my recommendation for this movie, since it's an Apple TV movie, is that you should turn on this movie, fast forward to the Battle of Austerlitz, remove any sense that any of this is historically accurate, watch that scene, and you are good. I think there were absolute moments of true brilliance in this film, but, overall, I don't know why. It was like, there was no narrative. There was just, a bunch of things that were strung together, and I was like, what was the point of this movie? I don't understand.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really terrible. I thought almost everything about it, to me, was bad. I don't remember the people talk about the battle scenes being great. I kind of didn't care about those. I know you and I disagree about Joaquin, but just a phenomenally terrible performance from him in this movie, and everyone else in it, frankly. And yeah, just like you said, I didn't learn anything from this. Even, let's say there was a historically inaccurate narrative, I wouldn't know what that was either. It was just a bunch of stuff strung together. There was no sense of time. There's no real sense of place. Yeah, I have massive failure. I almost fell asleep several times in the movie, which is not a thing I do. And it was just...
That's interesting. So I actually liked it better than you did.
I
was not, gouging my eyes out to, leave this... Babylon, I was like, why do I have to sit through this whole thing? I wanted to leave so bad. Napoleon, I was like, this is... Well, okay, so let's be completely 100% honest about, where my attention will go when I'm not particularly favoring a movie. I just saw a lot of really pretty clothes.
Yeah.
And jewelry. And, honestly, that goes a long way with me. I'm okay, people are talking. I'm not really paying attention. But I'm looking at all of the different costume elements. So, there were actually some things that held my attention. So there have been such painful sit-throughs. And I wouldn't say that Napoleon was one of them.
Okay. The chamber scenes really popped, I thought. Or, that was where, the most sort of, cool stuff was going on. There were a lot of people in them. And I thought, so one bad sign usually for a movie is, all right, what would I rather be watching right now than this? That's, better than what this movie is doing. And the movie I kept thinking about was Barry Lyndon. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I have.
Where it, this movie could have benefited by being, a little bit more like that, where that's very, arch, tongue-in-cheek sort of movie, but beautiful looking and more a historical period piece.
Right.
The other movie I kept thinking of was House of Gucci, which this movie should have been more like. If it was going to be this bad, it needed someone chewing the scenery like everyone in that movie.
Let's not discount Rupert Everett.
Doing
as well as the Duke of Wellington, but only at the end of the movie.
Yeah, that's another thing. I was hoping to get into this a little later. One of the good things about these big Ridley Scott movies is how many people are in them, and there was nobody in this movie. It was him and my guy from The Prophet, this French movie. He plays the early supporter of Napoleon. That's another problem with this movie. I didn't know anyone's name in it at all, or who anybody was, other than Napoleon and Josephine. There were no other fun actors in the movie. That's a lot to ask from your two leads when the movie is this bad.
Yeah, so let's go piece by piece by piece. So yeah, let's start with the hole at the center of this movie, which was Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh, definitely. And I love him so much.
But was literally the only American, and I'm I at least have his brother and his mother also be Americans. It was just so weird to have this one American person in the middle of this movie where, like, everybody else is an English actor. Like, this is so weird. Strange.
Yeah. And there were moments, I thought, where he kind of, I think they were, like, I don't know if they were, like, trying to be funny, but in my theater, there were a bunch of unintentional laughs, notably the boats
Yeah,
part.
I was just gonna say, like...
And I was like, okay, like, this is bad, too, but maybe if it were just like this, it would have been more fun. Like, the mummy part, where he, like, looks at that mummy when they're in Egypt, that was, like there's some life-threatening to come into the movie. But otherwise, he was just, like, so... It was like a, like a spoiled little bratty, like a Dudley, like a side character was, like, the motivation that I felt like he was given to be in this movie. Like, and that was thin as well. Like, it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, so his Americanness did not work. There was no de-aging or plus aging of the character, which was strange, and I was like, how much time has gone? Like, that was a weird choice. But I mean, yeah, he plays it very flat and almost completely emotionless, and you're like, this dude led a country.
Yeah, there was zero charisma.
Zero, and you're like, that's not possible. Like, he must have had some.
Yeah.
And, like, his big speech to the 5th Regiment, he's like, where he gets them to turn to his side, you're like, that didn't come off. And, like, there's just, I also felt like in his early incarnation, like, kind of before he becomes emperor, he's wearing, like, a jacket and this weird, like, ribbony belt.
Yeah.
He looks so uncomfortable in his own costumes, and I was like, he was not wearing those. They were wearing him, and you're like, this is supposed to be your uniform that you wear all the time. Like, he looked so uncomfortable on horseback.
Yeah. It didn't, it makes me sad to say, because I do like him a lot, but it was just really, really bad.
And I'm not a fan, but I'm willing to actually say, like, it was the direction.
Yeah,
it was a choice that was made. I think it was Scott. I don't think it was Phoenix.
He didn't, and I mean, there's also, there's articles out about him, Joaquin Phoenix, to him, being like, I don't know where to go with this character, and they apparently hashed it out. So it's very clear there was input from somebody else.
Yeah.
On what to do. And it just seemed, it wasn't like, he wasn't a cipher or an enigma per se. They weren't going from that angle, but it kind of came off like that because there was zero motivation. They mentioned his, like, background, like, one time. And after that, it's just like, why do you want to do this? Like, it just didn't come off at all.
It didn't. And so then number 2, Vanessa Kirby. So this was, I was like, gotta love the misogynistic casting of an actress who's 14 years younger than Joaquin Phoenix when in real life, Josephine was 6 years older.
I like that. I wish that had been the case.
Yeah, because it makes more sense about how he's, like, so obsessed with her. And then she's, like, the older woman who's had a lot of affairs. She's been married, several men's mistress, and she's just like...
would make the movie make so much more sense.
And I was like, the fact that you wrote it out, like, I was like, it would have made the movie a lot more sense if she came across as older and more experienced than him. And I was like, you changed that. And again, I don't think Vanessa Kirby did a bad job, but I don't know what they were trying to say with that character.
Yeah. It didn't come off at all like this, like, obsession. It didn't land to me either.
No.
Like, basically from the whole hype for this movie seemed to be that it was kind of these sort of battles surrounding this partnership and its picadillos, shall we say.
Yeah.
But, like, it didn't seem like there was anything there at all.
No, they never have an actual, like, conversation in the movie.
Yeah, it's like a mystery why he likes her at all. They don't, like, fetishize her looks or make them, like, spark at all. I mean, for him, I guess.
She's, like, a millimeter away, if not fully into nip slips territory.
But I don't think...
Almost the entire movie. So you're like, I get it. She has boobs. They're not very big. You're working very hard.
But she doesn't... Like, he doesn't seem... Like, I never felt like he thought that she was super beautiful.
Right.
You know, that's what I mean. It's just like that, like the
No, I totally
sort of,
am with you.
Spark between them was non-existent.
It was non-existent, and you're like, okay, the only thing you seem to have given her to do to have appeal is to have her boobs shoved up to her nose. And you're like, that's not, I mean, it can be sexy, but I'm like, you need a little more than that.
And
like,
they also were doing these, like, the weird sex scenes. Like, I thought that, like, deployed correctly, that could have worked for kind of what the movie was trying to say about their relationship. But, like, it was, again, that was another moment of some very unintentional comedy that wasn't funny either. Like, just, like, the cuts to that. People laughed in the theater I was in, and I was just like, oh, this is like another thing that would have been better served by sort of like the campiness of like, I keep coming back to like House of Gucci or, Barry Lyndon, where it's like, these movies are at least like...
Or Tom Jones.
Yeah, just something where it's like, it's like kinetic or it has like some kind of a spark to it, and it's just like so flat.
He's really flat, and then she's like laughing all the time. She's, like, giggling a lot to the things he says, and some of them are, like, really offensive, and she laughs, and I'm like, why is she laughing all the time? Like, it's not an emotion that is warranted by the situation.
Not at all.
And so you're like, I don't know what her interior monologue is, because, like, so that was bad. The rest of the cast, I felt like, tried their best.
I like the Robespierre part. That was funny. That was the one, like, really good part of the movie where I'm like, oh, if the rest of this is like this, we've had a rough start. But, like, all right, now we're going somewhere, and then just, like, nosedive from there.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I did appreciate Rupert Everett's Duke of Wellington.
Yep.
Tsar Nicholas, I actually thought that kid did a good job.
Yep, that's true. He was great.
And I did say, like, I came out of that movie and I was like, I understand that this movie was, like, directed by an English person, and I understand that, like, the glory of the British Army was, like, maybe a sidebar attempt of this movie. But there's no way you come out of this without thinking, man, those Russians were effing badasses.
Yeah. But they're, like, I think that was annoying, too, that they show they sack their own city, basically, and then they're taking pot shots at it's like kind of reminded me of another movie. It kind of reminded me of is like Last of the Mohicans, where it's just like very formal fighting and marching, and then like there's like Russians like taking pot shots at them, and they don't know what to do because it's like, who would predict guerrilla warfare or whatever.
Yeah.
But they were like such a faceless enemy for much of the movie that it just like contributed to not knowing who they were fighting, like what was going on geopolitically, and I was not interested in finding any of that out based on what the movie was showing me as well. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. Like I said, there was a lot of like, we've got to take on the British, and I was like, you lost this war because of the Russians, not because of how great Wellington was.
Well, yeah, because
but whatever.
The diagram of like all like, that one, and it's like, then you show up with no guys to the other one. Like, I mean, what do you think was going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, like, and that is always like, that is one of the things that people always draw the parallel to Hitler to. Like, you're all fine getting involved in a land war in the rest of Europe. You can't take on the Russians.
Nope.
Like, you won't win.
That cold,
You can't beat a Russian winner, and you can't beat an enemy that is, quote-unquote, willing to burn its villages to the ground.
Yeah. It's like he'll throw human misery at you until they win.
I did think that was funny. I was like, you're really trying to sell me on the British here, but it still looks like the Russians are the winners. Again, getting it out of the way, all the praise for the costumes. They were gorgeous. There were a lot of people in this movie, too. I mean, there were CGI people, but there were a fair amount of actual people, it felt like.
Yeah, it did feel funny that, they're, again, talking about the making of this movie, that there are hundreds of extras, and I'm like, that's cool. Like, even so far back as, like, Troy, there were, like, thousands of people in these movies. So, like, I'm not really that impressed by that. It seemed like the battle scenes had people in the rest of it. aside from the interior sort of, we'll say courtroom-esque stuff, or like wherever they're like weird, whatever the parliament or whatever, there were people in those scenes. The rest of it to me seemed very underpopulated. All the cities seemed empty. It seemed like the scene I wish had been cooler was the peasants, like the civilians running up on them.
The sans-culottes.
Yeah, that part. I'm like, this is this is what looked from the trailers to be one of the cooler parts of the movie, and it's over in like 2 seconds, and it seemed like nobody was in this scene.
Yeah. It was also very gory.
And not in a very juvenile way.
Yeah. I was like, mileage will vary on that one. I think that there was a tend to show the quote-unquote horrors of war.
Yeah. This scene, it was like goofy. Almost. Like the horse in the first battle. I was just like, what, does some like 13-year-old with a problem come up with this?
Yeah, so there's an exploding horse. I guess my criticism of the gore was that just having the people look like they're struggling and crying out was more effective emotionally at that. I didn't actually need the gore.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I think like overall the movie had no point of view, and the narrative of this just did not hold together. It was like, oh, and then this happened, and then this happened, and I'm like, what ties any of this together? Yeah,
it didn't, and things were happening, but you couldn't make any sense of them. While they're like what? Why is he there? Why is he doing this?
You're like, why is he in Egypt? Why is he anywhere?
You got like very inconsistent, which infuriates me. Like dating in places randomly on the screen. Do that the whole movie, or don't. Pick one.
Yeah.
Because it's going to make me think when you pick and choose like that, oh, I guess I didn't need that other 40 minutes where you weren't telling me where I was or what was going on or what year it was.
Yeah.
There's no sense of, like, temporally the movie was just a total nightmare for me.
Well, yeah, and again, that was part of why, like, not having the character age at all, like, I'm like, where are we and, like, what's happening? How young was he before? How old is he now? Like, that, I needed some sense of what was happening that way, too. But I honestly felt like...
Was he always, like, a 47-year-old man? Like,
apparently, yeah. It was just strange. I think, it was... And I looked up some interviews. So, like, what does he think is the movie that he made?
Yeah.
And, like, there's not a lot that I saw, at least in the coverage, of where he said, like, this is why I made this movie and what I wanted to talk about, and, like, the narrative perspective that I had from either the writer or Ridley Scott.
Yeah. This was, to me, seemed like, and, I think I've confided to you, we'll say it anytime, he is one of the greatest directors that, in my opinion, that we have in terms of just making original stuff. And this seemed like such a total, like, almost like a gun for hire job for me. Like, like you said, there was no, like, you just wanted to do something, right?
I felt like he wanted to make a war movie.
Yeah, and
that was my sense. I was like, he wants to make a war movie, and he was like, okay, World War II's been done to death. What else can we do?
And he doesn't want to do another, Gladiator, Kingdom of Heaven, and I didn't see the newest, The Last Duel. It's like, I want to do a war movie with, guns and cannons in them, right?
Yeah.
Not something I've, like, quote-unquote done before.
Right. And he's English, so he can't do the Civil War.
Yeah.
Or the U.S. Civil War. I would have
definitely preferred that. That would have been kind of awesome.
Yeah, so to that end, though, I did, for the most part, really enjoy the battle scenes.
Really?
Like, the fact of the war movie part of it was not the part that was let down. Yeah, I thought that Battle of Austerlitz, where they're breaking through the ice, was pretty freaking cool.
It was cool, and, just thinking about it, again, the sort of, like, that was a part where sort of, like, the puffs of blood kind of worked, obviously, on, like, the snow that's white, the water that's very light blue, and you really did feel kind of cold during these scenes. But I made the mistake of watching Kingdom of Heaven, like, 10 days before I saw this, and that is, like, people love Gladiator. That director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven is like his ultimate sort of like war statement to me.
Okay.
And that one, like that's a movie where you know exactly what's going on and exactly the stakes, and it seems so real. Or even something like this movie, it seemed like they were almost like fan servicey.
So I haven't seen Kingdom of Heaven, and I would say that I'm neutral on war movies. I don't seek them out. They're not my favorite genre, but they're not like something I'm actively avoiding either. Sure. I'm like, I enjoy a good war movie. So I can't say that I've seen a couple, but I haven't seen, I feel like kind of with Saving Private Ryan, I feel like the war movie got really small and intimate for a while and less focused on these sort of grand battle scenes. You know, like we had Dunkirk, we had 1917, like they were not trying to show the scope in that same way. And so this was kind of a return to a previous era of war movies. So
big and
yeah, lots of extras. And like we talked about this in Indiana Jones, and I think it came up when we were talking about Killers of the Flower Moon, and I was like, the one thing you notice in Temple Doom is like, there are so many people in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, when you go back and watch old movies, you're like, there are a lot of people in this movie.
Just like standing around, like it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's like, we just don't pay for extras that way anymore. So I appreciated the cinematography. The only thing is the soundtrack to this movie was also very bizarre. You have sort of like the chamber music for like the interior scenes, and I was like, that should have just been the whole movie soundtrack or one of the other ones. Just pick something. You know? It didn't even seem, and again, it's fine. You know, like plenty of people have made a more modern style of music work in a period piece, but this was like period pieces, but from the wrong period that we were in. And I was like, I don't understand like what we're doing with this music. Like none of it seemed to connect to what was being shown on screen, or B, like the period of time that we were in.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't good.
It was weird.
It is like very inconsistent, like much of the rest of the movie too. It almost seemed like it was like, all right, we have like it was like those movies where like they buy footage from another movie. Like it's like, all right, we spent all the money on these battle scenes. Let's we gotta just use this this music that's like lying around. I guess Universal did whoever, like we gotta use what's like lying around and like we'll make it work the best we can.
Yeah.
And it was like very
worse. You know what it felt like? It felt like a movie or a TV show that has lost its music rights.
Yeah.
So then someone was like, well, shoot,
what are we gonna stitch in?
Like, we gotta put something in this scene. Yeah, that's what it felt like. So I think for me, like, you and I talked about what an utter failure Babylon was, and I think that there are directors who are really good at scope and scale, and there are directors who are just better at filming something on a little bit of a more intimate scale. So it was kind of nice to see somebody do a grand battle scene and all the people and movement and horses and things. I did enjoy the battle scenes. I did think that that the best scene came too early. The Waterloo needed to be better.
Yeah, that was, and that's such like a mythic term.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
thank you, Abba.
The smart thing would have been either ignore it completely, or it does need to be like the main event.
Yeah.
And it was neither.
No.
Obviously.
Yeah. Which then sort of brings me to the question of like, what does make a good war movie? What do we want a war movie like to be or to show?
Well, for me growing up, it was like the crew, and some of them aren't going to make it, and you care about every one of them. So like Saving Private Ryan was like the first like big one that came out, while I was watching movies. And that kind of like nailed it to me. It was like the first violent World War II movie with like a lot of blood too.
Okay.
But yeah, just like, that emotional connection of like knowing that they're not all gonna make it.
Okay. So
But this had
so
none of that.
Stakes.
Yeah. This had none of that. There was nobody that you kind of like cared about dying.
Do you feel like cause matters?
Yeah, I think, like the context certainly matters, but maybe not so much because the people like doing the fighting, like they're not like making any of these real, like these decisions, right? Like they're on the front lines for a reason. It's because like nobody cares about them.
Yeah, which I've talked about this movie before, like sort of brings me to one of my favorite war movies of all time, Joyeux Noel, which is about the Christmas Eve armistice. So
it's a good Christmas movie, just throwing that out
there.
Like,
for World War I, and so then you have the Germans, the Scots, and I think the French. And you're like, okay, so they're all fighting for whatever they're fighting for, which in terms of World War I is absolutely nothing, right? Yeah. Like, if we can agree on one thing, that war was completely senseless. No one has a good cause. No one has a bad cause. There's like whatever. So you're like, yes. Yeah, so you're invested in the fact that like your country's at war, so you're going to fight, right? Like, and I think the movie does a successful job of having a sort of cause-free, or like the cause is just that you got conscripted and here you are.
Yeah.
So I was like, like thinking about it, like I think that like no American is going to watch a movie about the like heroes of the German army in World War II, right?
No.
Like there has to, like we have our biases and we're just not prepared to root for something that we cannot root for. So I was thinking, like what makes a good war movie? And from a cause perspective, I think the movies that are like war is terrible.
Yeah. Or like the world is ending. Or it's so like it's so fragile. It's like you're sort of like going about your everyday life and it's like breaking apart around you. That is a way better. I would never call this a war movie. Because it's like, there's fighting in it for sure, but it's like, it's like a fighting movie. I don't know. It's just like, it's not like an anything movie, in my opinion.
I mean, again, it has no overriding, but I would solidly put this in the war movie genre. But I think that's part of the reason is like, to me, it's a war movie because it just wants to show a lot of battles. But again, I think it's almost not a war movie because you have no idea why anybody's fighting any of these battles.
You don't care about anybody who's dying in them either. There's not like a single person where you're like, sad that person didn't make it. Aside from the fact that death is terrible, but there's no emotional stakes connected to the battles at all. It's like, I feel like they don't even establish like he might be in trouble if he like loses this battle.
I felt like I had emotional stakes in that I actually wanted him to lose.
Yeah.
Like when he is doing like going through the Russian countryside, I'm like, yeah, get him. Like I was actively rooting against him at some points. It was annoying. Yeah, so I think like then that's like your second point, which I think actually is important and this movie failed to do, is that a war movie that only takes the perspective of the generals is not a very good war movie.
Who cares about them? Yeah,
right.
There's, it's almost like Napoleon's hanging out with us in the theater, like sitting next to us watching the battles. Like that's what that's like.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm just as safe as you, basically. Like,
right. Well, and also because
like it's tense. They saw it as like tense, like he's not suffering the ignominy of war at all.
No, yeah, and I think you're right. I think a good war movie, often, not every time, some of them are just about, like the soldiers, but a lot of them like balance their perspective and the difficulties of being in command against the perspective and the difficulties of not being in command, of being an enlisted person, right? Like, I think that good war movies show you both points of view.
There are like the people in between.
Right.
Who are like kind of like in charge of somebody, but
right.
Are they?
Yeah. like commanding officers, and you're like, okay, so being an officer brings its own set of challenges, and ordering people to their deaths brings its own set of challenges.
Yeah, this didn't seem like he may as well have been playing like a lame version of chess the whole movie.
Right, yeah, he didn't. And so then when you have his big scene where he's like, remember I fought alongside you, I'm like, that's not credible.
Yeah.
He sort of, we're real happy to make him cannon fodder when it
He just wanted to use the like gladiator bit again where it's like Russell Crowe in that movie, like, he's fighting alongside them.
Yeah.
You know, like, so it's like what people like expected in this movie, but with nothing to kind of like back it up.
Yeah. No, but I think that, I think you made a really good point where if you tell it from the perspective of the general who's definitely going to live, you just can't create stakes that way. You have to give us some character in the movie who could actually die.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that I'm sort of biased towards movies that kind of show the horrors of war. And I think when you do a historical movie like this, I think when you show something like in the scenes with Robespierre and the battles in the court, we're just coming off of one congressman, threatening to beat up another congressman. Yeah. We're about a step and a half removed from when they caned somebody in Congress, right?
Yeah.
So we're at a historical moment, at least in the United States, where that level of brutality in our own chamber of government is very close and very real. And I feel like you kind of want a historical movie like this to have to say something about the present.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it did at all.
No. And I think that often war movies are, you use a past war as a parable for...
I would have much preferred a heavy-handed metaphor in this movie to the nothing that it had to say. All right, I see what you're doing. Give me something like that, at least that's interesting, or like more interesting than like a blob of a movie.
Like have a perspective.
So like here it is, Yeah, it didn't at all.
Yeah.
Even the I know like a lot has been made of the British pride, and even that seemed like half-hearted. Like, yeah, it didn't really,
I don't know if it seemed half-hearted. Like I said, Rupert Everett was chewing as much scenery as he could get his little teethies on.
But he's one guy. He can't he's just.
But I was like, it just.
He shows up.
Yeah, him standing in Moscow with the whole city burning and being like, I just didn't think he had it in him. Is like, yeah, whatever you're trying to say about the British, the Russians just still look wholly order of magnitude more badass than anything the British have ever done. Like, yeah, I just, again, I thought there could have been a better movie that got made out of this, but I was like, what would that better movie have looked like? You have more Ridley Scott background than I do.
Well, I mean, you have some of his movies where you feel like how shaky the situation on the ground is. And at the beginning, I thought they kind of, they had a hint of that with this, the instability in country. They could have done more with him, Napoleon coming off as sort of like, like the people like him, and he's like really strong, sort of like leader who's like maybe not in reality, but like being touted to them and in their minds as like someone who's like kind of like, gets stuff done. And it had like a kernel of that in the beginning, sort of like, okay, this is a very unstable place. And then it's kind of seemed like the reality seeped out of it when, 25 minutes or so, 30 minutes into the movie, he's like, okay, he's going to be in charge for the rest of the movie. And there's not going to be any sense of sort of like instability or unrest or this sort of sensation that all of it can come crashing down. Like all like Gladiator, Robin Hood, Kingdom of Heaven, these other like historical movies he's done. Like it always feels like the heroes are on such shaky ground, and like to get a moment's peace is so hard.
Yeah.
Any of these movies. And you feel that watching them. Like you feel like, okay, this is a very, very, very precarious situation. Like that is immediately at any point gonna turn into violence. Whereas in this, it just kind of seems like it's just like a bully movie. Like at any point, it's just like people just like want to be belligerent in the world this movie creates, and it's like not interesting.
Yeah, and I think now that I'm hearing you say that, going back to what I was saying before about how he redesigned the city of Paris and all the things that he did, I'm like, that was also a stakes issue.
Yeah.
It was not clear why he wanted to run France.
Yeah. He's like he's like, that's yours and I want it to be mine. I'm like a little bratty kid.
Yeah.
That's very much how it came off.
Right. And so and it's like a true lust for power that was actually not evident where it needed to be. Yeah. Because I'm like, you're trying to take over all of Europe. You should seem more ambitious than you actually are. And I think like the biggest failure at the center of that is the lack of charisma, right? Because if you're going to make a movie about somebody who's like taking over whatever, you want to be out of your seat like, yes, let's do this thing. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not French. I don't want to do this thing. I don't care, right? Like, you want to be swept along with the
tides of...
Yeah, which definitely, I'm blinking on any good example.
It didn't happen in this movie.
Well, I mean, again, this is an unfair comparison. One of my favorite war movies of all time, Henry V. But you're like, because every battle speech is somehow a watered down, paraphrased, written version of the St. Crispin's Day speech that Shakespeare wrote. Like, you're like, because Shakespeare wrote the battle speech, so it's really good. Like, kind of can't compete with that. But yeah, when he's, like, we band of brothers, like, you're like, yes, let's go kick some French ass right now. Like, it's a great battle speech. Like, you're just in it. You're like, I'm fighting for you, Prince Hal. Like, let's do this thing, right? So, I think you needed to see him as a leader, and you needed to see why he wanted to even be a leader in the first place.
Yeah, and to, like, your point, too, at no point is he either, like, it never seems like he's bad, either. Like, I feel like there's, like, other people who, like, in the elite that don't like him, but it never seems like he's, like, alright, he's gone too far. Like, he's bad for France. Isn't conveyed at any point either. He just kind of is like, it may as well have been anybody up there. Right. Right. Like, so he's not like, oh, I was with him for like a little bit, but he's taken a dark turn and now like my interest in this movie is his downfall. Like, that didn't happen at all. Yeah, an absolute power creeps absolutely kind of storyline. Yeah, that wasn't, like, there was nothing there. But turn in a character. Yeah. No, I mean, it was just very bizarre. So I did not hate it as much as you did. Do you want to try to give it a social impact score? You get 2 or 3 if it gets other people besides me wanting to read and learn things. I don't know. Low 2. I'm gonna go with a 2. I feel like I don't want to dole out a 1 or a nothing for this movie. Okay. Seems unworthy of. It's also like not bad enough to seek out as a bad movie, so I don't want to encourage that. Yeah. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna give it a 3, and I'm gonna say, just go watch the battle. I really enjoyed the Battle of Austerlitz. I thought it was a really cool scene. It was shot really well. Like, watch that part. Totally worth it. And I think we're gonna get some costume art direction Oscar nods. Yes, that's it, though, I hope.
But I will say, like, it would be very well... Like, I won't be sad if it wins Best Costume. Oh. So far, it's absolutely been the best costume design I've seen this year. They were really good.
I don't want to see Joaquin in there at all. I'm going to be really angry if that happens.
I'd be shocked.
We live in a crazy world.
We live in a very crazy world. I'd be shocked. Like, that performance was so unstellar.
It was legendarily
bad.
Boring.
Like, people are going to make fun of that performance.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not even that. If anybody sees the movie,
enough. Yeah, it's more like the Pan's Labyrinth. Like, he won't even know your name. Like, that's kind of how I feel about this performance. It's like, we would all be better off just if it hadn't happened.
You're special because you have boats.
Yeah, and I
Which
again,
I laughed out loud at, and I was like, I don't know if this is supposed to be funny or not, but that was hilarious.
That's the best you could do. That's you're really just like
far and away the best line of the whole movie.
So dumb.
All right.
B-.
Tell us something we should read, see, watch, buy, experience.
I'm in the middle of rewatching The Leftovers, one of the greatest TV shows of all time. Very short investment of 28 episodes. Watch it.
Okay. I'm going to take you back. So I was thinking of some of my favorite war movies, which honestly I've recommended a bunch, and go back and watch and listen to our episode on 1917, which I highly enjoyed. I'm going to take you back to the 90s, to a little 90s gem. Go ahead and watch Memphis Belle. A very heartwarming, uplifting story based on a true story, World War II movie. Do it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say In Love and War, the Sandra Bullock, Hemingway movie.
Oh.
Chris O'Donnell.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. I honestly, I was kind of casting about for good ideas, and there were, lists of, war movies, and I was like, set during a wartime does not make you a war movie. If you have 0 battles in this movie, I'm not giving The Pianist
I do,
as a war movie,
No, definitely not. You're right. You can't, this is an army being present
somewhere.
Doesn't count. You need 2 armies fighting.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a requirement.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think we can agree on
set
that.
during wartime, it does not make you a war movie.
No, definitely not.
All right. Well, if you have opinions about better war movies we should see, you can feel free to reach out to us at moviesmatterpod@gmail.com. We have a Facebook page. We have YouTube. We look at our comments there. Find us all the places. Reach out. Share our podcast. Tell your friends how cool and knowledgeable and fun we are, or we're the worst and hate listen to us. We don't care either way.
Hate listen, still a listen.
Yep, exactly. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.